with Alan Juddy, and this is another episode of Seed Dating, the podcast where you get to meet one of Agricom's forage products, learn about its attributes, and match it to your farm system. And here to help nurture this new blossoming relationship is our very own relationship expert, Alistair Moorhead. Hi, Al, and who are we going to meet today?
Hi, Juddy. Well, we're back on the dating scene again, and that's seed dating, Juddy.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, just checking. But let's meet Massie swede.
Ah, Swedes, the winter feed that you can eat too.
Yeah, Juddy. Massie is a very good table swede, and that means it can feed both livestock and humans. It's a really attractive purple-skinned, yellow-flesh swede.
With that description, Al, it sounds like it's a bit of a looker. So you could say it's a looker and a cooker.
Oh, shit. That's a shocker.
But remind me, what are Swedes?
Well, Juddy, Swedes are Brassica napus species, and they are a long-holding winter feed crop that is based on a bulb and a leaf component over time.
And so we're using, when are we sowing these types of?
They're typically, Swedes are typically most suited to cooler summer environments where they take a bit more summer moisture. They're less tolerant than the rape species and other species that we use for summer cropping particularly. They tend to prefer to have more benign summer conditions to keep developing because they're quite slow developers. We use quite low sowing rates, roughly speaking, 8 to 12 plants per metre square to allow these bulbs to develop over time.
Cool. And the Massie, just give me a bit of a description of where that fits in the types of Swedes that we can get.
Oh, well, again, like we described, they're quite slow establishing spatial plants because we're trying to develop bulbs. But we focus on two, broadly speaking, styles of Swedes. They're designed to hold the whole way through our winters, which are typically about 90 days to maybe 110 days, depending on which part of the colder parts of New Zealand we are discussing. And you tend to find there's a group of Swedes that are more palatable at the start of winter. They become more palatable early-ish, and we sort of describe them as a sort of like an early style Swede or a softer Swede. And then as the frosts kick in, you tend to find another group of Swedes, sort of like you describe them as a main crop Swede historically, and they would take a bit longer of a frosting phase to start to become more and more accessible to animals grazing. So you sort of have an early maturity and a late maturity. And the terminology maturity is not a really valid point because they're designed to last the whole of winter. Then it doesn't mean anything about going to seed or reproduction. It just means how early they become palatable or more palatable. And Massie very much is one of those slightly lower dry matter styles that has got more palatability earlier in the grazing system.
Yeah, so maybe we'll unpack the farm systems that we might use this in a little later. But if I'm looking at this paddock of Swedes, what are the things I notice as a farmer first about this particular variety?
Oh, well, that's really important for Massie. So the selection traits that we responded to, our breeding house, which is our FIL relationship, has created the Swede genetics, and the things that we really responded to here was healthy leaves. So leaf diseases are becoming a bigger pressure on Swedes, particularly as you go through periods of stress. So although they're designed for softer summer conditions, we also have periods of stress hitting most of our landscapes at some stage, and leaves tend to crash and burn fast, and we value them because they're a source of protein and they keep our crop growing from a crop physiology perspective. But really, when it comes down to it, the big traits that we value are bulb disease traits, because the bulb makes up the best part of nearly 85 to 90% of the crop, and we've only got 8 to 12 of them per metre square. So bulb diseases are a massive limitation to yield and holding ability in cold winters. So things like club root tolerance, dry rot tolerance are really big traits that we look for in breeding, and Massie is very, very good for all of these. Very resilient Swede.
You've touched on the leaf top, and you've talked about the importance of protein. do we see more leaf, or is it a good holding ability?
The way that's a really good question. When it comes to Swedes and Massie particularly, when I'm looking at genetics, I value leaf, but I don't always value lots of leaf. Swedes have bulb crops that can be shaped in a couple of different ways. They can be sort of tankered, almost like a parsnip, or quite round and sit in the ground with only a small taproot sitting them in the ground, therefore possibly even higher utilization styles. I look at the roller leaf. The roller leaf is just to intercept light. The scale of leaf, the sheer volume of leaf is so much less attractive to me, because the more leaves you grow, the longer your neck becomes on the top of your bulb. And so the Swedes become what's called necky. And the reality is that sometimes is a response to nitrogen use, because bulbs aren't a particularly high nitrogen. Swedes are not typically a high nitrogen crop. They tend to be driven by phosphate. A lot of the base level nitrogen we have in our landscapes is often enough to get them through. So a start on nitrogen, then just leaving them to develop is a big trait. The thing is, these necks tend to reflect lots and lots of leaves that have been produced throughout the year, and then they drop off. They don't last forever. They drop off, and then your neck gets higher and higher as it's pushing up to get more and more light in a very leafy environment. I would describe Massie as very intermediate when it comes to its necking ability and the sheer volume of leaf. I would describe it more as a healthy leaf type, which means that what you see in autumn, you actually get a really good representation in the middle of winter and in the middle of our winter phase, where you tend to find you have the most minimal amount of leaf in the calendar year, and that leaf is most impacted by disease pressures through the late autumn, and then that just is what you are capable of holding or regrowing through that winter phase. And Massie's really good for that, Juddy.
And you touched a little bit on palatability. Obviously, being an early maturing yellow flesh Swede, there's some advantages from a palatability point of view there. Talk to us a little bit about what you found with Massie.
Well, we're a couple of years into our field, experience with farmers growing it, and what we can see very clearly is that even before their breaks finished their leaf component, which often animals target the leaf initially, they're already eating the bulb. So we're seeing bulb chipping, bulb grazing, even before all the leaf is consumed at the start of a day's break. So it's early, and it is really attractive part of it, which it's sitting as a dry matter percentage. Swedes sort of range between 8.5% and 11% dry matter. At 11% dry matter, a Swede can be very, very hard. And our Massie sits at the lower end of that dry matter percentage. Now, in history, if you have a low dry matter percentage, due to the way maths works when you create your fresh weight to dry matter discussion, that is always a disadvantage, and you often don't yield particularly highly. But what we're seeing with Massie is that it is yielding extremely well for a low dry matter bulb. And so this is probably the trait that's breaking a lot of the historic norms, where we can actually yield at the top of a yield table and yet have the lowest dry matter. And as you well know, that's not an easy combination.
No, that's not an easy combination.
No, it is not. And I think it reflects possibly that the amount of fresh weight we are producing, i.e. the bulbs are quite big. And so Massie has lovely purple, rounded, large bulbs. And I mentioned the rounded part because you talked about the grazing. The rounded part of the bulb means that a large amount gets utilized above ground. So quite regularly, that last little bit of a Swede that's connected well into the soil tends to be a residual, often needing to be grubbed at a later date, or disked up at a later date to be utilized. Massie's utilization on average is very, very good.
Just thinking about the farm systems that this would move into. We've talked about this as actually a winter feed option.
Correct.
But tell me, as you said, we're in an early part of the release. Where's it really found a fit in terms of farm systems?
Oh, well, initially, it's very, very obvious the traditional capital sheep production systems are really the home of Swedes by scale, where we're grazing thousands and thousands of ewes on Swedes through the winter. And, use of Swedes is not limited to that whatsoever, but that is absolutely a traditional stock class for that. Obviously, we have cattle grazing, both beef cattle, young cattle, and dairy cows. All of those stock classes fit very, very well over the top of a Massie swede crop. Linking it to soil type is quite a big and important point when you're grazing bulb crops. Yep. A lot of soil for hooves to touch, so you do want to have an appropriate landscape to be grazing those animals on. And then the deer industry would certainly utilise a swede like this one because of its low dry matter and its palatability. Would be a great benefit in a deer-based system. My most recent visit to a Massie paddock was on winter lambs, and that's quite an interesting stock class because, again, Swedes, even though their dry matters are low as a whole, they're actually quite hard. And so it was quite positive to watch a group of lambs really access these sort of Swedes early in the autumn. I think that was the first week of June, and they were very much, which is the first week of our winter, and they were very much well into the crop by then. So I would say winter grazing lambs is, it's capable of being used for that.
Well, because I guess that would be where you might think there could be some problems in terms of particularly lambs and bulbs, and young mouths. But it seems that Massie's a swede that lends itself with its very low dry matter to being useful even in that situation.
And early grazing, I just think is the part that helps a lot.
Excellent. Well, sounds like she's a bit of a beauty.
Yeah, well, actually, Glenn, we coined the phrase, it's a perfect purple. So it's got a very distinct purple skin, and it is a lovely shape and good leaf, lovely shape. Beautiful purple skin, assuming it's getting a bit of light. Light makes it go even more purple. But when you see it and it's out nicely spaced out, it is a very, very much a perfect purple. And
what feedback have you got from the couple that might go in the pot for a Sunday roast?
Look, to be quite frank, I'm not really Swede, and typically it's all smashed and used like that. But it looks like it's really good. It's got good structure and people are enjoying it. That's what I'd say. Remember, there's a lot of kids in Southland that have bought their first cars based on selling Swedes at the gates. So it's quite an important side hustle in Southland and Otago.
I don't know about you, but mashed Swede with a bit of cracked pepper. You can't get anything better.
Oh, fantastic.
Well, she looks like an absolute beauty, this Massie Alistair. I'm going to swipe right because that perfect purple is absolutely right for me. You've been listening to another episode of Seed Dating with Al and Juddy. Hope you can catch another episode real soon.